Fantastic.
Okay, just give me 1 second. Well, Judith, I'll start off by saying, is my friend, and I met her because she moved to where I lived and joined my writing group. And that was very lucky for me because I've really enjoyed knowing Judith. She's a very unique person. She also helped me out this semester because she worked with my creative writing class at the college where I teach a little bit, and that was really nice too. But there's more to know about Judith than just the parts that I like about her. Judith is a writer and also a teacher, and she writes poetry, fiction, and nonfiction. She has had residencies at Yaddo, AROHO, and she is an individual artist recipient for the Maryland State Arts Council from when she lived in Maryland. She's done readings at the New York State Writers Institute, the New York State Vietnam Veterans Memorial, and the Washington, D.C. and Cleveland Public Libraries. She's also done readings at Rouseabout Books in Rehoboth, Delaware, and Greyhound Books in Maryland. And I can't think of the name of the town at the moment, but
Berlin,
Maryland, right. She was a speechwriter for 20 years. And then she moved to where I live, which is in Milton, Delaware. And she has been in anthologies that I've published, quite a few of them, including Equinox, Suspicious Activity, and the Halloween Party anthologies. She writes horror stories as well, quite scary ones, actually. And we published her novel, The Woman Puzzle, last year about this time. And what I like about Judith's writing is that she's a little bit of a magical realist. So her writing will take these unique little turns of fancy that other writers don't do. Magical realism, if you don't know, is more of south of the border kind of thing in, Mexico, Brazil, that kind of thing. It's more associated with Latin writers, Spanish from Spain, but Judith does it really, really well. And her characters are always very quirky and interesting, as you might imagine, if you know Judith. So she also received, she was on the Delaware State of the Arts podcast, and she was in one of the Delaware State Arts writing retreats as well. She was an invited guest there. So you're going to really enjoy reading Judith's writing, I think, and hearing her today.
That's a great introduction.
So, thank you. I thought I'd just read. I was asked to write about the inception of the Woman Puzzle for someone else who's doing a podcast, and I thought I'd just read the first paragraph of that and then read the book. So, I wrote myself out of a dysfunctional family. As a 7-year-old, I had already experienced the death of the two most important men in my life, my maternal grandfather and my father. Several years later, my mother remarried a sociopathic widower with 3 children. My spiral into hell continued. A major lifeline was my writing. Juvenile and later more sophisticated poems and scenarios and short stories poured out of me as I sought to survive and eventually heal. So that's how I began. I like that first sentence. I wrote myself out of a dysfunctional family because I have not met one person who does not have some modicum of dysfunctionality in their family. And writing and actually singing were the ways I kept myself okay and built my life. And so writing is essential to me in terms of my sanity, if nothing else. And during the COVID epidemic, I keep writing. It really does help me. And because I'm a writer, and anyone else who does things that are more isolated, the COVID epidemic changed things, but didn't change things because I'm still at the computer and I'm still proofreading on a front porch, etc. So anyway, and Bill, who you can't see, is also a writer and in the writing group. And so I have an in-house editor. So that is always helpful. And anyway, so I thought I would read, since I was told 10 minutes, and this is just under 9, the first 2 chapters of the Woman Puzzle and open it up to questions. And then also I thought at the end, I would read just the prologue to the book I've been working on. And I was fortunate enough, right as the pandemic was setting in, to be at the Virginia, I had been accepted for residency at the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts, which is known as VCCA, which is a wonderful place. About 10 days into my residency, we got an email at dinner saying, pack up, get out. And you know, then the downward spiral began and I had to get to Amtrak. And so I didn't finish. And I did notice that I am not as prolific at home as I was when I was in Virginia. And when I wrote the Woman Puzzle and I was at Yaddo, which is in Saratoga Springs, New York, I finished the book so quickly, a different book. It was The Resurrection of Hundreds Feldman. I finished that so quickly, I did 4 new short stories, and I was only there for 3 weeks. So for anyone who does anything artistic, yes, going to a retreat does help. It does give you, you know, you're not looking at the bills, you're not answering the phone, you're not going downstairs because you forgot to put the wash in the dryer, etc. It gives you a focus because you don't have wash to put in the dryer and you don't have a bill, and you know, you just have your 4 walls and your writing and walks, which were nice. So anyway, so I will start the Woman Puzzle, and Diane's husband David, who's part of Devil's Party Press, did a wonderful job on the cover. I'm opening it all the way, but you see how they put Anne's picture so that she's front and back. So the Woman Puzzle, some of you know this already. I will try to give it as much inflection and keep it interesting to you. Book 1, Framework. 1, Daddy. What was it that wouldn't let Anne sleep that night? Anticipation of her 8th birthday party the next day? Something. Lying awake, she heard her mother in the next room, her parents' bedroom. Charles, what's wrong? Oh my God. When Anne stood at the door to her parents' bedroom, her mother wasn't there, and it was just her and her father. And she remembers being happy for just that one moment, that one single slash in time, standing there alone with her father, her daddy, until the next moment when she called his name and he never answered. Never in a million years would he ever answer his daughter again. Her daddy was the daddy of her dreams, the rainbow man who came home from work and lifted her 1,000 miles into the sky, pushed her on a swing that arced through the universe until there was no earth at all, only magic. They lived together in the half-light of their own world, a world he filled with dolls. The very last one he gave Anne came packaged in a blue and white striped wardrobe that opened to reveal the doll on the left and many outfits on doll-sized hangers, including a lace-trimmed nightgown and a burgundy velvet party dress with faux patent leather shoes and purse in a slide-out drawer. In their private world, a wooden swing hung from an ancient oak tree outside the fence, beyond which the drive-in movie could be watched from their backyard on summer nights. Some weekends, he would take her into his office, and she could sit at his secretary's desk and push down the Smith Corona typewriter keys. She was his blonde-haired firstborn child, and he loved her completely. He was the father, the 6'4" Army veteran who returned from his war to both create and love her. He was the fulcrum of her world. Anne moved all the way up to 8 years old, believing the thinnest and strongest of golden threads would always keep them together. Always. This horrendous, earth-shattering night, she called out into the next moment, "Daddy, wake up, Daddy!" But he wouldn't. He couldn't. He didn't. She held his arm tight and shook him. He didn't move. She held his arm, and when she let go, it dropped hard to the bed. She screamed at him, but no sound came out of her mouth. Her daddy was lost beyond time, beyond the colors of the day. Her world shrieked and made no sound, and she exploded into 1,000 pieces of Anne. 2, The Dance of Away. Now be a good girl, Bernie said to 15-year-old Anne, and we'll go visit your mother this weekend. Her mother. Where was Anne's mother? First she misplaced her father, and now her mother. These thoughts tumbled about her head as she made eggs. It was morning. This was breakfast. Her brother Solomon was upstairs in the bathroom getting ready for school. Her stepfather Bernie sat downstairs waiting for breakfast, his eggs, sunny side up and don't break the yolk. Now where was her mother? Away. Her mother Irene wasn't well and she went away. Bernie imparted this tidbit of information to Anne. He had stood in this very kitchen the day they removed her mother somewhere. Her mother screaming somewhere. Her stepfather told Anne her mother was away and no one was to know anything. If nosy neighbors like Sadie next door asked, just tell them Irene is away on a vacation. So as Anne understood it this morning, she and Bernie and hopefully 10-year-old Solomon would go to that place which wasn't a vacation, where her mother was, and visit her. Away, soon. Thinking about all this, Anne broke an egg yolk. Bernie, standing behind her, saw this. You broke the yolk. You know what? I can't eat him like that. What is wrong with you this morning? Anne stood there, her long, loose blonde braids frizzy from sleep. She kept her large breasts hidden beneath the folds of an old, faded pink chenille robe left from her mother's pregnancies. Anne didn't answer, felt uncomfortable with him so near, danced her dance of away, and moved to the sink to throw out the broken egg. Answer me, Annie. I want to know what is wrong here. He turned her around, and she was against his chest that smelled of lime and sweat. Please, Bernie, not here, not now. Solomon, please leave me alone. Hey, he said, releasing her quick and hard so she hit the edge of the kitchen table. Hey, sweetie, Bertie wouldn't hurt you, now would he? I'm just running late for a meeting since I can't have my eggs. Can I have my kiss goodbye? She stood against the kitchen wallpaper of large birds that mocked her, that whispered evil words. Anne didn't understand. She stood behind a red chair and prayed that if she closed her eyes, this would all go away. So she closed her eyes and felt her body once more pressed to his, the lime and sweat heating up into nausea. She let him kiss her, this man, her mother's husband, anything to get him away from her, especially before Solomon came down those red carpeted stairs from the upstairs bathroom. Red, her mother's favorite color. What was it like when her mother was here? She tried to remember. Anne would make breakfast for both of them then, her mother and Bernie, usually taking it up to their bedroom where they were giggling and pinching and tickling each other in the midst of satin sheets and feathers and velvet and colored lights reflected in mirrors. But that was at the beginning, when they were first married. Then the room got messier and darker, and then Bernie moved out of that room, moved into Solomon's room, had Solomon move into the little room off the kitchen, where Solomon said there were green monsters, so he had to sleep under his bed. After the reshuffling of bedrooms, Anne would just take her mother's food up to her on a tray, while Bernie hung around the kitchen, hung around Anne, while she made the food. She felt like she couldn't breathe. He didn't attempt anything then, but he was awfully close. Anne would try to make her mother's tray pretty with a flower in a vase, with a napkin folded into a pocket for the silverware, but her mother never noticed and would often dip the flower into the food, fill the napkin with salt, spill water over the whole thing, and laugh or cry or both. The sicker Irene got, the less she would eat. There was a time that she would only eat if Bertie fed her, but then they both tired of that. Finally, one day, Irene declared, I will only eat red food. So it was strawberries for breakfast and tomatoes for lunch and red peppers for dinner. Sometimes red cabbage, raspberries, and reddish purple grapes. At first, Anne could just leave the red food in the refrigerator for her mother to forage. But then there were days toward the end that Irene said she wasn't getting out of bed, not to eat and not to pee, and Anne would just have to take care of her. That was when she was talking, always talking, especially about her red food. I'm dying, you see. I need the blood. I need the blood from the food. I'm painting new blood in my body with my red food. So for a few weeks, she ate and talked and painted, but then she ate and talked less and less and less. And then she gave one final scream, and they took her away. The 83 pounds that were left, they took that away. No one was supposed to know. Anne wasn't supposed to tell a soul. But Anne rarely saw a soul after that. It'd been in a couple of weeks now. Bernie didn't want her to go back to high school, didn't want her to tell a soul about anything, nothing that happened in that house, to her mother, to her, to anyone. Anne could remember when a neighbor came by with a civil rights petition, and Bernie was angry when he heard Anne answer her question, "When will your mother be back?" with, "Who knows, it's her hip, could be indefinite." He told her that her answer sounded stupid and suspicious. This morning he reminded her, "If you see our nosy neighbor Sadie with the ugly thick glasses and the ironing board chest, tell her to mind her own business, and that your mother's sick, put out her back or hip on vacation, visiting relatives in Chicago, stuck in traction until she can be moved. And if you do as I say, if you listen real good, we can go visit your mother this weekend." Anne wanted to know if her brother would be included, wanted to know where they were going. Should she bring flowers, a nightgown, something? But she was afraid to ask, so she didn't. This morning, Solomon managed to leave for school without bothering Bernie, and Bernie luckily had to rush off to work. Anne sat in a red swivel chair with her eyes closed until the sound of Bernie's car engine died away, and then wondered what would fill her line of vision for the rest of the day when she opened them. At least he wouldn't. At least she was alone now. So, those are the first two chapters.
Well, you really have me wondering what happens next.
Good, good. Then you will keep reading.
You really dive right in. The reader really identifies with Anne. We feel so bad for her and scared for her.
Yeah. And, you know, that's why it's the woman puzzle. It's, you know, first the things have to break apart. And then if you're strong enough and you have support, you learn to put it back together. But it always has those cracks in it, like a puzzle does.
Does the book carry her like far into adulthood?
Yes, all the way through adulthood, and from one coast to the other. So she starts in New Jersey, she's in Cleveland, and then she's in Washington State. So it's a cross-country journey as she, and it's towards putting her life together and becoming stronger.
You mentioned in your foreword that you wrote yourself out of dysfunction. I assume that, you know, there's something healing about writing to confront those things. But I imagine there's some pitfalls or some difficulties. Did you encounter those as well?
I think that in writing, as I said in the long piece I did, the essay, there are, I think, as this my first finished novel, the first one I finished, I've written a lot since, and I've often heard this said that a lot of first novels are autobiographical. And however, I still use a lot of imagination, and I'm not Anne, and a lot of and all the characters are made up. But of course, there are pieces of things that can remind me of my own life. I had a close friend call me after reading it, who I grew up with and who had always been supportive. And Robin said, "I'm really angry at you." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Because you never told me." And I said, "Never told you what?" "Well, that your stepfather," I had a stepfather, an older stepfather, who had kids, who wasn't Bernie, but had things in common. She said, "You never told me he molested you. All those years we're growing up together, I could have helped you." And I said, "But that's not me, it's fiction. And what happened to Anne didn't happen to me that way. You knew what happened to me, and it wasn't that. It was much more subtle in my case." So you know, but she was really angry for a few minutes that I had kept all this from her. So, you know, things like that happen. So there, you know, there'll be readers who might think that, you know, this was my story, but it's not. It's just, it's like a prism, and it's what you see through the prism, and it's, there's a lot of distortion, which is my imagination does that. So, and, you know, my mother, while she had her problems, you know, the kind of extreme craziness of Irene wasn't my mother. I think one thing that was a problem was while my mother was alive, you have these, you know, thoughts of, well, what if your mother thinks you think this is her, or she recognizes some stuff. But on the other hand, I just had to write what I had to write. When my mother did die about 13 or 14 years ago, I had trouble writing at first, and then I started writing notes, and then I ended up writing a book of short stories called What to Wear to Your Mother's Funeral. So there was some freeing because I knew that she wouldn't be reading it.
I think a lot of writers feel that way.
Yeah.
There's certain things they can't write about while people are alive.
Yeah. And now, since I've moved into some fantasy and some time traveling, and, you know, I'm farther away from my own story, but not the feelings, you know, I get the feelings. And I sometimes see someone and I get a visual idea, but it doesn't mean the character's them. It just means I got this visual idea or heard a sound.
Yeah, we put together things, a pastiche of various things to create something new.
Right, right.
I'm wondering, so you've written short stories as well as novels. How is your process different for the two? Your approach, or what do you prefer?
It's interesting. Oh, hi, Sue. Friend just came in. I don't see her, but I know she's there.
I am.
The process is different in that a short story is closer to a poetic form because it's shorter, and I like to look at every word, even in a novel, but in a short story, it's a little easier to do that. And I mean, I've been interspersing writing my novel with some short stories, because in a way it's a break to go to another form. And when I write poetry, it's always about something personal that's happened to me. And the best way for me to deal with those feelings is through a poem, which is how I started with poetry. And then I've tried to carry the idea of words counting and the beauty of words that you get with poetry into my other writing. The short stories, they're just, I mean, my short stories tend to be longer, but although I just had a flash fiction piece accepted for publication, so I'm kind of playing with that too. I just think, you know, all the forms are viable, and I want to be prolific in all of them. The novels are a long-term commitment. I do a lot of rewriting. My process also often involves yellow pads onto the computer, printed out, yellow pads onto the computer. I mean, I take a long time with it, and that seems to work for me. It's a little old-fashioned, and this particular book, I didn't have a computer. It was so long ago that I started. I said in the piece that if you remember phonographs, before this resurgence of them, I had a phonograph, and I had Ravel's picture at an exhibition with the arm up, so that while I was writing this and the rhythm of it, I kept listening to that over and over again as I wrote, as if I was doing music. And oftentimes when I'm on the keyboard, I feel like I'm playing the piano.
Cool. Cool. So there's a certain rhythm to your writing then, I imagine.
I'm hoping, yeah. I mean, it feels that way when it's true, when it's coming through me. And then there are times where I'll reread something I wrote and I don't remember writing it. That's weird. Or I'll write something and then I'll look back in my notes and realize I had written it that way before in my notes. And I didn't, it's a very strange process. And if someone walks into the room, like when I'm really in the zone, like if Bill comes in, I'll scream. Because I'm so far away. And I don't know if he's used to it. He tries very quietly to say, I'm here, or something, so that I don't scream, but he knows that that's, I kind of float away. Yeah.
Cool. Just to remind everybody that this is a conversation and not an interview. So if there are questions you want to ask or comments you want to make, or something sparks something, or if you want her to read something, just chime in at any time. Just remember to unmute yourself first.
Well, Judith, I would like to know actually if when you write pieces, you take on the mood of the piece you're writing, and if it makes it hard to get back to real life afterwards.
Yes. Yes, if I'm writing, there are in this book rape scenes, and not too many. There used to be a lot more, but a very wise woman, Ian Ballantyne's wife, Betty Ballantyne, I had read the rough draft of this when I was in New York, and she said, we do not have to experiencing every time Anne is violated, because the reader doesn't want to go through it every time. Just give us enough. But when I do get into those sections, which are to me horrific, you wouldn't want to ask me if I, wanted to hear a joke or go out and play, because I need to come down from the scene I wrote, because it is not pleasant. And I think the balance that I don't leave Anne in that place, totally in pieces. She is a strong woman who becomes stronger, and she, she's the woman puzzle, but like all of us were men and women puzzles. We've suffered different things, and I think she's stronger because of what she's able to put back together. Not that I would wish what happened to her on anyone, but that's true about anyone's life I hear about. So, she just, I do get into her moods, but I also like when she's happy, and then I can be happy too.
I'd be really interested in hearing some of your poetry, just to kind of compare.
Okay, I don't have any.
You don't.
I have it, but I didn't pull it out. I'm trying to think if it's very poetic. The beginning, the prologue of my next book, my most recent book, I think has some poetic. If I had known, I would have pulled some poetry. But I could read at some point the beginning of the next book, because the prologue I think is meant to be poetic in terms of the use of language. So that might satisfy you. I don't know if you want to hear it now or if you want to talk more about this. And I don't know if Sue's picture can come up or she doesn't want it to come up. But anyway.
I have one of your poems in front of me, Judith, but I'd have to read it, but I could do it if you want me to.
Sure. Which poem is it? Is it that very dark poem?
It's the Great American Novel, actually.
Oh, Diane has permission to read my poem because she has it in front of her and I don't.
All right. So this is one that we published of Judith's. It's called The Great American Novel, and it says, for Bill in this season of renewal. And I'll do the best I can, but Judith is probably better at this than me. When I decided to write the novel of my life, I'm glad I remembered to put in your blue cords and madras shirt, your crossed swords and metal sign of peace, your deep brown Ohio eyes, your jump wings, and your bear walk. When I worked out the plot, I didn't realize the perfect tension of bad short stories and wrong charactered plays, rewritten unrhymed poems, and notes that didn't scan, all produced before we met, for writing warm-ups, journaled journey pieces. One night we talked of your book, a helicopter taking men back to the war they loved and hated, and I spoke of my first novel, cruel stepfathers, crazy mothers, failed couplings and a happy ending, ours for the asking. But that night we didn't ask. Instead, we hung on the crescent of the crescent moon, pinning our plot lines on its points. We landed in a sacred space, were touched by angels, were dancing to Charleston at Edith Wharton's house in the snow. Now one child, many stories, into the book, plot moving from Albany to Phoenicia to Washington, D.C. We know there's enough tension, enough love interest to keep the promise of a happy ending. And the characters, well, the characters are slightly unbelievable. A husband of teddy bear proportions with tears for the names on and off the wall. A wife of clown possibilities who dreams and dances and cooks very good cheese eggs. A child of the crescent moon placed over Russia who hasn't quite got the knack of knock-knock jokes, but blesses our food, graces our lives, and says, sing louder. So the possibilities for this book are infinite, enough to keep the reader interested and destined not to be left on the remainder table. Happy ending.
Thank you, Diane. I forgot about that poem.
It's lovely.
I needed to hear it today.
Yeah, it's great. I love it.
So there's one of my poems. Luckily, my editor has it.
Yeah, sorry about that.
You did great. You did great. Thank you.
It's kind of like a short story too. It's got
Yeah.
that kind of arc
Oh,
to it.
really?
Yeah, I think that I do a lot of crossovers. When I lived in Cleveland, I was part of the Poets League. Cleveland, for people who don't know this, is a hotbed for poetry. That's where Mary Oliver came from. She and I went to the same graduate program. And
Cleveland,
yeah.
we just think that in general.
Really, I was allowed to read my pieces with the poetry group because I was doing very experimental writing at the time, which the piece that just got published, Tuxedo Man, is going to be published. And that's from that time period where I was very experimental. And so my first pieces that were published were very experimental. Like I'm trying to think which, it was a women's university that published this, do you remember which one? No, The Glass Room was published by Cleveland Magazine. Anyway, it was Vassar, I think, and Vassar took a piece called The Former Gertrude Stein, and what they wrote back to me was, this is the best Gertrude Stein type writing we've ever seen. So that's how experimental it was. And the interesting thing was I was married to someone else at the time, and he read that. He was an interesting story of a person. And he read that, and he came out from reading it, and he said, luckily he could read, he said, I would be, this is before Vassar accepted it and said all that, he said, I would be embarrassed to show this to anyone. And I knew the marriage was going nowhere. And then I got the acceptance from Vassar. So, you know, that put me on the right track in terms of finding Bill. So that was all good. So that's a piece of the poetry. And I like experimental writing. There was a man, P.K. Saha, who's a linguist, and he was in Cleveland, and he he once took one of my stories and counted how many periods and how many commas. He was just, he like analyzed it, because at that point I wasn't using commas. So, you know, it's been an interesting meandering of my own writing style.
Do you mean you weren't connecting up sentences? You had sort of more simple sentences than
periods, no commas. Yeah, I'd have to find an older one, and maybe the one, Diane, that I just got accepted, the Tuxedo Man. I did rewrite it before I sent it, so I may have put in a comma, but a lot of them had no commas in them.
Interesting.
I don't know why. I mean, it was just the voice in my head didn't have commas. So that was that. I've since, as you can tell from this book, used commas, but now I'm doing time travel. I keep saying to myself, why don't you just write about an afternoon and it'd be easier, and you just put the people in it and start at the beginning, go to the end, instead of coming up with these strange ideas and things that really need a lot of thought. And I just challenge myself. It's just, to me, it's important to challenge myself, to take the next step, to move up in what I'm doing. So that's what I'm doing with the it's called The Glass Dress, the Bible according to Ruth. And that's the newer one I'm writing, and that's about Ruth and Naomi. They go, as traditional in the Bible, whither thou goest, that's all in there, and they're going back to Bethlehem, which is where Naomi's from, except that this angel type person named Gabriella, who's sort of an angel in training, but anyway, she gets involved, and instead of going to Bethlehem in Jerusalem, Bethlehem, they go to Bethlehem, New Jersey in the 20th century by mistake. And they end up on the ranch, which is a type of cult. You know, she's supposed to go out there and, you know, deal with the sheaves of grain and etc. And the whole thing gets turned on its ear. And there's a lot of magic in it. And so that I submitted a piece of that and got into Virginia Center for the Creative Arts, and that's what I worked on there. And actually for the Delaware Arts Council Prize, I sent a piece of that also. I'm putting a lot writing on that one. I've been using it a lot as my sample of my writing, because that's where I am now. So that's why at some point in this, after I answer any questions or comments I get, I brought just the prologue, which is like a page and a half, to read, so you can see what I'm doing now, as opposed to the woman puzzle, which I started such a long time ago. So, were there any questions, comments?
Judith, can you hear me at all? It's Carrie.
Oh, I hear you. Are you Miss iPhone, Carrie?
Yes, I'm with my phone.
Hi. Yes, dear.
So I have said to you before that I would like to see your writing get even weirder. And I think that the glass dress is the place to put that experimental writing back in. And get poetic and bizarre. Because
Okay.
I think that story is so weird as it is that I would love to see you go back to your writing you're talking about now and put it in your modern pieces.
Okay, that's a good shove in the right direction. Carrie's one of the people in my writing group, so she gets to shove me. Anyone can give me ideas, but she gets to push because she hears it.
And I also want to say that poem made me cry. I was in here driving, listening, and weeping. It was so beautiful. I've not heard anything like that from you before. I loved hearing it from Diane, but I knew it was about you, written by you. It was just perfect. I loved it, especially the referring to the characters being so strange sometimes, and that you were like a clown and Bill was like a teddy bear. I loved that part, and I loved the cheesy egg part.
Yeah, I like the cheesy egg too.
And
It's
we
that,
still-
little, it's that little touch that makes it very real and human, the cheesy egg.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe I should go back to some poetry.
Or make more eggs, I don't know.
Or make more eggs, cheesy eggs. Yeah, my daughter still talks about she misses my cheesy eggs. So, thank you, Carrie. And I hope you're driving safely, even though you were crying.
Well, I'm parked now.
Oh, okay.
Well, I'm really wondering, Judith, this the woman puzzle, you said you started a long time ago. When was it published?
November 2019.
2019. And then, so you picked it back up again, and worked on it some more extensively before it got published?
Medium. I think I had 2 agents for it before, New York agents, when it first came out. People really shied away from the rape stuff. If you think back into the 80s, they, the bigger houses, which is where it was sent, they liked the writing. I think they were a little uncomfortable with the stepfather raping and also the spiritual, this woman and I, when I lived in New York, et cetera, everyone in DC, everyone's in therapy. Well, Anne doesn't go to therapy. She goes to like spiritual shamans and stuff. She, which wasn't as accepted then. So I always feel like I'm writing ahead of what is then going to come out. And I think it was the wrong time for it. And then a bunch of people wrote about stuff like that. And then all of a sudden, you could read mine. I did that with a book about a transsexual too, which was before it was just on the cusp of it even happening. I lived in Cleveland. Cleveland Clinic did a lot of these operations at that point, and it was all very new. And so that was, let's see, Marilyn Monroe and it was called Marilyn Monroe and the Dick Test. And the Dick Test is a test for scarlet fever. And that book started because I turned to the dictionary and I was reading about this thing called the Dick Test. That test, and the Dick referred to the doctors, the scientists who came up with the test. I changed their time period, but I made them into characters. And a woman whose mother left her, and she was very close to her father. So this was not a missing father in this one. And he falls in love with this woman who uses the name Marilyn Monroe and looks like Marilyn Monroe. And then the girl finds out that her stepmother used to be a man. So, but that was way ahead of people doing transsexual stuff. I mean, I read what I could on it. And I was on a hotline where I talked to some people in Cleveland. So, it always felt like my timing was a little off. But, maybe if I get as crazy as Carrie suggests in the new one, which, I'm pushing, then, and get back to the poetics. Because I just feel like, for me, my writing, each word should count, and the word should be beautiful, even if the action isn't beautiful. I want the words to be important, each one. And that's hard. That's why it takes me a while. And the book that I finished at Yaddo was The Resurrection of Hundreds Feldman. And that was about an Amerasian girl. So that's my Vietnam story. And when I tried to get it out at that point, people were saying, oh, people aren't talking about Vietnam anymore. People aren't reading about Vietnam. And this was the aftermath. This was a child who was the aftermath of the war, because these children were called children of the dust in Vietnam. They weren't accepted there. And we know how mixed race kids often have been not accepted here. And so, she came over. Hi, Carrie. She came over and she was looking for her mother and her father, because her father was an American GI and her mother turned out to be a guerrilla fighter. So that one is the one I wrote at Yaddo. That got the Marilyn award for fiction, and it's still sitting here, but I hope to find a home for it someday, because Vietnam, which is now history, ancient history, is still important, and the experience of war is important because we need to learn from it. And anyway, so, and I had a mentor who was Gloria Emerson, who actually was the first woman journalist who was sent to cover the Vietnam War by the New York Times. And she wrote a book, Winner and Losers, which got a National Book Award about it. And she really was wanted so much to have this published. She really tried to help. She really loved the story, and she's no longer with us. So, you know, someday, and that book came to me in a dream. And I knew it was over when I had a dream about it being over. It came to me in a dream, and that's how the book started. I stand at the foot of your bed. That's exactly what the dream started with. And it was this Asian looking woman with long hair talking to me and asking me to tell her story. And I knew it was over because I was in a classroom in those old wooden desks that have the all one piece. And there I was, sort of an adult in there. And there was this woman, Asian woman, and she had long black hair with gray in it. And basically letting me know that I was done. So, and then there were all sorts of things, you know, the Resurrection of Hundreds Feldman came as a name in a dream, and I found out that I didn't know this, the Vietnamese number their children, they never do number one, and that the inception story of Vietnam had to do with 50 males with the dragons and 50 females, and so that 100 number was really important, and I didn't know that either. So dreams are important. Dreams are important. So any other questions about, now I've talked about, I don't know how many books that, and poem. Anything?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
There has been some talk about writers writing in the narrative voice of some race or gender or ethnicity other than their own. And the controversy about whether it's okay to do that. And I'd love to hear what you have to say about that.
Well, it's interesting because a lot of my characters are middle-class Jewish women. I can't imagine why. And that's the voice I know because that's who I am. However, when this came to me in a dream about this woman who's Amerasian, she's actually half Jewish. Well, she thinks she's half Jewish because of the Feldman. She's actually half Italian, it turns out. But, you know, we thought she was half Jewish. And she marries someone who's Jewish. But when a friend of mine was friends with one of the judges for Marilyn, and I didn't know that till it had all been judged, and she said, I'd like to go to lunch with you and her. She wants to meet you. So I went to lunch with the two of them, and this woman just about flipped out, who was a Jewish woman from New York. I mean, she and I were very similar. She thought an Asian person had written it, that I had captured it. I mean, I met with people to get the Vietnamese right. I met with people to get the French right, you know, and I met Amerasians at a conference, and I listened to their stories, and, you know, I did the research. I felt like I was channeling it. And it even got an award, and there was the voice, you know, and I wasn't trying to usurp someone's voice. I was trying to give voice to this young girl who had gone through so much. And I already had feelings about the Vietnam War. So it was very close to me. And, you know, I've read Amy Tan, I read a lot of Asian writers, and they're wonderful. But then I look at one of my favorite writers is Virginia Woolf, and it was a man who wrote Mrs. Dalloway. And let me tell you, I'm pretty Virginia Woolf, I'm very protective about her. He did a fabulous job writing Mrs. Dalloway. The voice was perfect. It was so good. And I've read that with The Geisha. I think it was called The Geisha. Again, a man writing it, and he hit all the right notes. I mean, so I think what it comes down to, it's not the same as when they cast movies where you actually see the person and everything, and people are left out. Actors are left out without roles because they're Asian or they're Black or they're Hispanic, and then the roles go to white people. I think in writing and in something creative, you just do what moves you. And if the reader thinks it's wrong, then they close the book. Nobody makes you read a book. So, but this woman, I mean, she totally flipped out. I was supposed to be at least part Asian if I wrote that book.
So did she take you to task for that?
No, I think she could barely eat because she was so amazed that I was another, East Coast Jewish woman. I mean, like her, and that the voice was convincing. That's because it channeled through me. I believe in a lot of things with spirits, and I think that the woman who asked me to write her story was authentic, and I wrote her story because she asked me to, and that's all I can say. And I hoped I had done her justice, because she felt no one was telling her story.
It does seem like you really shortchange the writer's imagination, the writer's creativity, to limit the writer to only his or her own experience, his or her own, born identity, just, it's like people don't really understand what writers do.
Yeah. I mean, even in the woman puzzle, Margaret is mixed race. For anyone who read it, I probably caught that. And that's the character I made up. Do I have a right to make up a mixed race woman? Why not?
I don't think that's the issue typically. It's not that we can't make up characters who are different from us. It's that we shouldn't co-opt the stories of other races. So there was a famous thing this year where a woman was about to publish a novel. She had a big contract from a big publishing house about an indigenous group in the southern part of the United States. And the indigenous group said, "Why is she writing our story? She's a white woman." And the publishing company pulled the contract, and the woman apologized for writing it. So it's not so much that you can't include characters who aren't the same as you in your book. It's that these, a lot of minority people have never had the opportunity to get these publishing contracts and tell their stories. So it's kind of that, right? I mean, I have lots of characters of different races in my stories, and I think that's a good thing when we do that. It's taking the care to make sure that these minority writers also get the chance. And like for myself, I had a short story with a Black guy in it, and I ran it by a few Black writers that I knew to make sure I had done an okay job. He wasn't the main character of the story, but it's that taking care, it's that not taking something that isn't yours kind of thing. I think that's the basic idea.
Kind of a complicated thing, because
Very
it reminds me of like that cooking brouhaha where some I can't remember her name or anything, a white woman became really popular during the pandemic for a cooking vlog when she was using recipes from various ethnic groups, when there had been people from those groups that had been doing their own thing for so long, and never got any recognition. And here she is, like, kind of like getting recognition for that. Is it her fault that people are noticing these different foods because she's the one who's bringing them to the forefront? Or is it the fault of like the whole cooking world that they never recognized those foods and the chefs that were producing them until she started, you know, cooking those? It's kind of like the same thing. It's the publishing world that is at fault for not recognizing the writers of unrecognized groups, you know, who have their own stories. You know, they're always going towards the blockbuster names or whatever, kind of like them not recognizing Judith's stories about transsexuals and stuff like that until somebody else has written about it and gotten recognition.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly true. And I know about that that recipe thing. I actually wrote to that writer, that cookbook author, and asked her why she would not acknowledge or invite these other people to be a part of her project. And that's where she fell down.
Uh-huh.
You know, she had a duty and she didn't know she had it, which I can understand, but she had a duty to invite other people to participate. That's why I ran my story by some Black authors. Like, you have a duty to like do your due diligence and get these things checked out now. You know, you didn't used to, because nobody had the power to question when their traditions, their stories, whatever, were co-opted. But now we have a duty to do it. And I think it's good to include diversity in our writing as writers. We just have to take care to do a good job. We have that responsibility now, and we didn't used to.
Yeah.
I think the other important thing that you guys are talking about, and I never really thought about, is timing, and how there's a place and a time for the stories, and it's not always now. It's very interesting to think about the pertinence of a particular piece.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at a Steinbeck story a little while ago, and you know, he wrote about Mexican people a lot, and not in a careful way.
Wow.
You know. And back then it didn't matter; he could do it, and he's still a great writer. But today, our modern day Steinbeck has to do a better job.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that, and actually the Resurrection of Hundreds Feldman, while she was the main character, I had a lot of other characters that, you know, like I had a Jewish woman in there who helped her a lot, and I had other people also who were involved with it. And it was really about Vietnam, which was something I did have, you know, felt very close to, and having married a Vietnam vet, having been an anti-war protester, I mean, my impetus and why she might have picked me to write her story had to do how I felt about the war and the children who we left behind, which was an issue. And that's why I did, even in the 80s, was talking to Amerasian children who had come over, and you know, talked to a man who was a boat person, who and asked him about things. And you know, in other words, I made sure that there was an authenticity to it. And also Bill, who's sitting here, he helped me a lot with the Tan Son Nhut airport airlift and all that, because I'm not a Vietnam vet and I wasn't in Vietnam, and I wanted to get the Vietnam part right, you know, which was another aspect of the story.
Yes,
So,
I think you do that well, Judith. I think you're very respectful in your stories, and you do a good job.
thanks. And also I read a lot of stories by people who are writing about their own culture, such as the Asian writers and the African American writers, and the, you know, because that's different. And my native story is more towards things that would relate to the resistance during the Holocaust. And that was my first short story. I kept having dreams about being in the resistance in Paris. during the Holocaust. And that was my first short story. And I don't know where it is. I hope someday to find it. But that was the first finished short story, was about that. And it was very much, you know, my dreams and my history. So anyone else on this or on the woman puzzle? What?
I've got a question.
Okay, and then Bill has one when you're done. He's silly. Like, come over. Yeah, go ahead. Go, Morgan. He'll go after you.
Okay. What is your ritual? Your regular writing ritual? Is there a specific time of day that you write? Is it whenever the mood strikes you? How does that evolve?
Well, originally, I'm a morning person, and my most creative time goes from, let's say, about 8 to 2. At about 2, I start having this kind of ennui set in. However, I have found that there's certain physical things, especially with the COVID, that I am trying to do to keep because I can't have a mind and an imagination if my body isn't together. So I've been doing water aerobics, which is in the morning, and yoga, and they're all in the morning, and I've tried to find things later in the day. So that means I have to do that, and I'm not sitting at the computer till about, 11 o'clock or 10:30, but I am sitting at the computer when I'm done, and I try to make all my appointments later in the afternoon, like doctors and stuff, later in the afternoon, because I know my best time to write. So I have a wonderful, this is like the best writing room I've ever had. It's the biggest writing room I've ever had. I've always been in these little alcoves and stuff. So I have, you can't see, well, I'll show you. I have in front of me actually the memorial pictures of my two biggest mentors. This was Suzanne, who really got me started in Cleveland, and that was her younger, beautiful, and unfortunately she died in a tragic car accident. And this was Gloria, who I was talking about, and she actually was a suicide, but she had Parkinson's, and she said, "If I can't write, I don't want to live." And those words have been very important to me in terms of my ritual and coming back to the writing over and over. I can write. Gloria can't. Suzanne can't. And these people were wonderful writers and wonderful mentors. And so that, this really helps me to say, look, I know you can't, but I can, and I will as long as I can. And I think of Carson McCullers. Carson McCullers was in bed. I forget what her debilitating illness was, but she could barely write, but she wrote. I mean, her hands were not working right, but she still wrote. And when I was at Yaddo, there was a visual artist who had her studio that she would collapse into for months at a time. And I just was so happy to visit her studio. So I get in, I let other writers influence me who I've either been close to or admire. And I keep the pictures there as visual reminders. And I would like to be a little more structured in terms of the writing and saying nothing can happen in this time period. And that's why I got so much done when I go to these residencies. So I come up to my office at 11. I wish I was coming up at 10 or 9. And I have little sheets that tell me the things that I'm working on and I need to do at the end of each day. I look at. Usually it was bigger, but I ran out of the other sheets. And that's, that's my schedule. I have things like this one says, Glass Dress, chapter 32, rewrite, chapter 33, write. Queen of Viagra, which I'm doing with my writing group. I finished the piece for November 1st. I have to edit the piece for November 15th. Coffee chat on Facebook, prepare. Residencies, I'm applying for new residencies, ongoing. Submit short stories. And, that's what it says. So, that's what I do. Does that answer?
So do you work on multiple things at once, like you intersperse them, or you mainly work on just one thing?
I try to start with something, and I mean, this is the glass dress. I don't know if you can kind of see the kind of mess that's here, but a woman I met at VCCA, we meet on Facebook once a month. It used to be every week, and we give each other ahead of time our pieces, and then we read it aloud, and then I rewrote. And so I put on this stand the first thing I'm going to work on the next time I sit down, so that I don't have to choose. And if that's what I work on all day, because I don't get to the other stuff, you know, that's what I work on all day. I prefer working on one project at a time, but life hasn't been like that. Did you have a question?
No, I had a comment. It's a tricky thing sometimes, two writers in the same space. When we were first going together and talking about our work, Judith let me look at what she had written to that point on the woman puzzle. Went a little farther than what she read you this morning. I sat down with it, and I'm somebody. I've written several novels, not one of which goes without somebody getting killed. I'm kind of an adventure novel person. So, you know, if somebody else handed me a book like The Woman Puzzle, I probably wouldn't be very interested. And I said to myself, if she's really not good, this is going to be very difficult. Because how do you know? You know, and I loved it. It was wonderful. I thought she did great characters, did great scenes. She did apologize a lot for her spelling at that point. And I said, Judith, they've got people they can hire who are spellers. It's the writers that are rare.
So she appreciated your idea of what makes a good book. People don't have to be killed.
The relationship could go on. That was the litmus test. And I read his book too, what he was doing, which was very different from what I was doing with alternate realities and, skeletons manning helicopters and, etc. But, even though that's not my norm in terms of what I read, alternate realities, it opened me up to different kind of writing, and that was good. And therefore, the relationship could continue.
I was also worried about whether Judith would like my writing. I didn't have anything. I didn't have any fiction in print, other than certain reports I wrote for New York State.
Judith, it might be a good time to give us some of what you're working on right now.
Oh, sure. I can do that. It's not real long. I just figured the prologue. This is called The Glass Dress, the Bible According to Ruth. Okay. Follow me to a world where clock faces shatter, a place where magic overshadows science. For when I entered this alien place, I escaped the yellowed, bent-edged, finger-licked pages of the Bible. My name is Ruth. Some men may call me Sophie, Joan, or Tabitha, but my name is Ruth. The Ruth known and praised throughout biblical history as the loyal daughter-in-law of Naomi. The Ruth who declared, whither thou goest, etc., etc. But my telling of my story is different. I begin my tale in ancient Moab, just like the familiar account. There is a Naomi. There are her 2 dead sons and her dead husband. The room reeks of death. My immortal words of piety and devotion remain in my version. Brandishing a diamond earring stud, I etch on a window pane that refrain that sings throughout my story, whither thou goest. I stand in a Yaddo studio in Saratoga Springs, New York, where I am privileged to create under the auspices of a writer's residency. Here I will compose my saga of sorrow and woe, love and redemption. This time I will relate my own story. It will not be attributed to prophets like Samuel, steeped in men's religious rules. Their Bible, oppressive and solemn, is set in a man's world, commanding women to sit behind an impenetrable, densely woven curtain that carries the stagnant odor of the ages. My name is Ruth. 4 chapters, the Old Testament wedged into Judges, possibly related by Samuel at some later date, comprise my official record. Some consider my portion a parable, a lesson taught, a fiction. That is fine with me. I prefer my alternate telling filled with magic and miracles. In the end, who is to decree what is real and what is not? The lessons of life are many, the actors myriad, the truths infinite. In my telling, I no longer serve as a stepping stone to the house of David, to the reign of Jesus. My story is mine to write. It's about me shedding the snakeskin of subservience and emerging into the sparkling, powerful flesh of a fully realized woman, a writer of tales as viable as the original biblical one, or more so. I know, like the stories written by other women, the story I relate here was not the one copied into those well-read Bible pages many of you were steeped in since childhood, but it will be worth your while to heed my telling. I promise an extraordinary jaunt into life beyond our narrow human vision and our paternalistic blinders. As I have learned, bending Chronos, Earth time, is replete with benefits. Entering Kairos, no time, reveals magic and mystery beyond the stars. As author, I will arrange my memories on pages hoping you will read them. While my words sleep breathing hard, they remain untouched, though vibrating with anticipation, until a synapse clicks and commands, read me. My words stand at attention, at the ready, waiting to be grabbed, considered, criticized, embraced, awoken. As you sit sipping your French roast coffee laced with half and half and Kahlua, you might mull over the fact that until now, you haven't really attended to these pages entrusted to you. You may give them a cursory thought, a 3-page exploration, or none at all, or you may actually read them. So, dear readers, the words await, hoping one day to indeed be examined at your bidding. Meanwhile, I, author and celestial imbued warrior, am free to frolic in the land of Chronos or Kairos, or that lovely eternal ether in between. My name is Ruth. What follows is my story according to me. Do with it as you please. I am no longer available for comment. Prologue.
Do you often write prologues?
When I moved to do it, I just did it in the horror story that I submitted to Devil's Party Press. I wrote a prologue and an epilogue because I was talking about the man who discovered the horror and how it affected him. And then I go into the woman's story, and then I come back out with a third person of the man who was impacted by discovering the horror. So that's a short story, but short stories I don't usually have prologue and epilogue, but sometimes I don't know what, there's no usual to what I do. It's just what I do. So
I have another question that might not have a usual to it either. Do you tend to know where your story is ending, or at least have a vague idea, or is it just kind of like the next thing that happens?
I don't know when I'm writing the rough draft always where it's going, and this particular story, I have a sense of where it's going to end, but getting there is getting harder and harder because I'm about to hit the high point of the story, and then the denouement will be easier to write, but the actual climax of the story as you do this is going to be very complicated, and it's going to take a lot to write it. And in my head, I don't know all the pieces that are going to go into it. That's because this is a rough draft. The only part that's been done over and over, because I've submitted it to get these residencies and everything, would be what you just heard and maybe the first few chapters. Otherwise, it's all rough draft. So I will be rewriting the whole thing as soon as I can figure out the climax, which is like the next 2 chapters. So,
Judith, how do you have the confidence to say it's no longer a rough draft? Like, what gives you that in your writing?
that's a good question. With the Resurrection of Hundreds Feldman, it was a dream, you know, where she basically came to me and said, let me know without words, just a visual. It was done. I think I have a sense that I've said, you know, I planned to say something, I said it, and I ended it. However, the truth is, if I pick up the book again, I will start playing with it again. So at some point, maybe it's like when the book is done with me, and says, leave me alone, you know, just let it go. And also, I have my trusty in-house editor, and sometimes he's good for saying, you know, I think you need a little more, or maybe you've gone too far, or, you know, so that's part of it. But, you know, when I read it over, there's a certain satisfaction at the end that I feel like I've done as much as I can do for these people. It's not like they're their therapist or something. I've helped you as much as I can. I've told your story the best I can, and I need to move on. I'm sick of you. So it's weird, but it's I get there somehow, you know. And you know, something like the woman puzzle, I thought I was done years ago when the agents had it and everything, and yet I've changed things. And Diane, you were the final editor on it, and you know, there were still some things that needed to be cleaned up. And the one I'm rewriting now, The Queen of Viagra, with the writing group, I'm like pulling parts of it apart, and I thought it was done years ago. And you know, I'm with the help of the writing group, I'm seeing there's stuff that needs to be fixed in this. So sometimes it's time putting something away. I've told students that too. Put it away, pull it out again. You need new eyes, fresh eyes on something. So
I have a question, Judith, and it's directed at you and to everyone else who writes and who teaches writing. I remember many years ago, I was told that one should direct fiction to someone at a 5th grade reading level. Your prologue is many levels above that. What is I'm looking at everybody, I'm looking at your faces, okay? I'm looking at you. What's the general feeling on that? Has it changed? Have we increased the reading level of the reader?
I personally have never adhered to that rule except when I was a speechwriter. When I was a speechwriter for 20 years, I did have to keep it to a lower level. And again, depending on the audience, if I was redoing testimony for, you know, the head of the Commissioner of Social Security, and he was going to be presenting it to Congress, then I could up the level. But that's not a speech. That's, you know, testimony that he would present to, supposedly, in the good old days, people of some intelligence. But that was different than writing a speech for him to address people who worked at Social Security and were commemorating a path and accomplishments of different presidents. That was one of the speeches I had to write. And we mixed them, Democrat and Republican presidents. And, you know, that's at 5th grade level, I needed to make it understandable, because the thing about a speech, unlike a book, a speech you hear once, unless you get a transcript. I mean, you're either going to get it or you're not, because the person's not going to say, oh, let me do this speech again in case you missed something. But in a book, a person can go back through it. And so I have never written, except when I was doing some children's books. I haven't used that as a rule, and I haven't taught that to students, but when I taught speech, I did. Lowest common denominator when you're giving a speech, who's your audience, etc. When I'm writing, I don't know about the rest of you, and I'd be glad to hear it. I don't necessarily have the audience in mind. I need to tell my story, and hopefully it'll find an audience. I don't know how to...
Excuse me, everyone. I just got a text which said that it's official that Biden has won. So I don't know what states, but
All right.
What state?
Pennsylvania.
Great. Now I can prepare for this.
I just heard that. Yes.
Quick, put the Kahlua in the coffee, quick. Oh, God, thank you.
Yes.
My prayer, which I was walking along the ocean months ago, and I was thinking, I need something to say. And it's like, what came to me was, God, be brilliant. And that's been what I've been saying over and over again, or goddess, whatever is out there that I have no control over. Oh, Julie, do they have to have it certified by someone real fast? I don't trust the process.
CNN, MSNBC, NBC are all saying it.
Does it say?
It does have to be
put 'em over,
certified.
Diane?
And there are date certain, they say, where it's certified by the states, and then it goes to Congress, I think.
He won Pennsylvania, Judith. That's what did it.
Thank you,
Right.
Diane, and all your people from Pennsylvania. Diane's
That's
from
right.
Pennsylvania.
Originally,
You're from Pennsylvania too.
I'm one of the bad things that happens in Philly. That's right.
I'm from New Jersey, and as I said, my daughter's in Ohio feeling badly that her vote, she didn't pull it out. But that was probably her calling to tell. Since she voted, she's been very into the election, so that could have been her, because she keeps writing to us, and this is not her norm. Are you watching? People are saying Biden won. That's probably her calling, saying Biden won.
Well, pretend you don't know. Let her tell you.
Oh my God, thank you.
I tell you though, this period has been a really good civics lesson for a lot of people, and I'm hoping that they don't just revert to being apathetic. Seeing how important it is to be engaged and involved and exercise your right as a citizen. So.
And I hope we can all come together, because as Joe has always said, I am campaigning as a Democrat, but I will be the president for everyone.
Yes.
And, we so needed to hear somebody of some intelligence saying it. And yay, Delaware, he's our guy.
Yes.
Right, that's right.
He's our guy. So, that's great. I don't know. Were we still doing a question?
Oh, we were talking about level.
How do you know when it's over?
Level.
Yeah, Diane, how do you know when it's over? Not the election, your pieces.
I guess I just sort of instinctively feel that it's over, but then sometimes I go back a couple of weeks later and look at it again and think, good God, what was I thinking? This is atrocious. And go back at it, I don't know. I think maybe for me, I just am like, I'm bored with you now. You must be done.
As a poet, I like to let my poems get cold. So like I kind of forget really what I wrote. And then I can look at them much more objectively. And sometimes, sometimes it's a couple years. It's like I'll rediscover a poem and it's always nice when it's like, oh, this is really good. Okay, And then sometimes it's like, oh, now I see what people were saying about this, because sometimes I wouldn't, I'm in a writer's group and people have, difficulty with an area of my poem. And I'm just like, what, what's, I don't get it. And then like later on, it'll be like, oh, I see why this was a problem. And
Yeah.
I should trust my group more, but I think you don't really know how to rewrite it until you really see it yourself.
Yeah, we had a writer in the group that Judith and I and Bill are in at one point, and Morgan is in it too, who wrote poetry in it, and she always said it's not her, it's us, that we just weren't bright enough to get it, and eventually she got frustrated with us and left. But really, what good is your writing if it doesn't reach the reader, right? It has to reach the reader. That's your job. So yeah, I get that. But
and that circles back to Morgan's question about like reading level. I had never heard that rule except for newspaper writing, and it makes sense that it's also for speech writing. Yeah, I'm with Judith. You write. Personally, I write because there's something I'm trying to figure out. There's an argument with myself, or there's just something in me that just needs to get out there. So basically, I think my first audience is just myself, or my alter ego, or something like that. And even like when I'm rewriting, I never think what level reader, and maybe because it's poetry. You're not gonna have many bestseller poetry books. So it's like whoever's interested in the same thing I'm interested in, and that's small audience. The one thing I do think about though are references, because it's kind of difficult to figure out sometimes how many people are going to get certain references. And for example, it seems like biblical literacy is really on the decline, and things that used to be accepted common knowledge are not anymore. And so if you're trying to use biblical references, even well-read people sometimes won't get it at all. And do you take that chance or don't you? And
so my college students don't know fairy tales, nursery rhymes, biblical stuff anymore, and I find that odd. But as a reader, if somebody has allusions like that in their piece, that's the reader's job. The reader has to go look that up. I firmly feel. It shouldn't be so heavy-handed by the writer that you have to be an expert, but you should be able to recognize at least that something is from a fairy tale, from the Bible, whatever, and then it's your job to go look it up if you don't really know. I think that the reader has a certain amount of work that they have to do with the writing too.
An epigraph can give you a clue, but
yeah,
you don't you don't have to do like an encyclopedic reference.
But there is a big slippage in that, and I don't know why that is. It's interesting,
and it's being replaced by pop culture references, which might not age well.
Right. Yeah. I think even some of the things I sometimes put in, I realize might not be something, a song or something that people wouldn't know what the hell I'm talking about. So sometimes I just have to say what year it is. Like the Queen of Viagra is 1999. I'm really clear about that. I did not want to go into the 2000 whole computer stuff. So I did that on purpose. But then I can look up things about what kind of shoes were they wearing, and it's fun. To me, that part's fun, to see the different stilettos, and did they do slingbacks, and who was the designer, and that kind of stuff is fun for me. I like putting it in the past sometimes. It's a near past, but the past. Of course, the Bible one. I give enough about the story of Ruth and Naomi that you wouldn't have had to ever read a Bible, but you would know that this was, what she said to her mother-in-law, because the rest of it is time travel, and it's in the 21st century, sorry. So it doesn't relate, and the cult is whatever I make up, right?
I also think the Queen of Viagra works because it's character driven, not time and place driven.
Mhm.
Sometimes when stories are really time and place driven, they just don't work because the interest isn't there in the reader, I think. It's too specific. So yours is like a flavor, but it's not the main point. The main point is the quirky characters, and that's really cool.
You think my characters are quirky on that? Yes, they are. Yes, they are. They're very quirky. I love quirky characters. I love quirky people. I'm so straight-laced. I don't know why. But I like to have fun with my writing. I do. And I like to elicit feelings. And my writing tends to be character driven, I would guess, if I had to pick something. Although in the Queen of Viagra, Bemidji, Minnesota, where I worked on the John Kerry campaign for the union I worked for as a speechwriter, Bemidji, and then my friend Sue here, she knows Minnesota, so it was really strange to meet someone who, Sue, you hear me? Anyway, she's on mute. Turn off your mute, Miss Minnesota. So
yes, I hear you. Be careful.
You hear me. And so you were interested when I told you I had a book that had a big part in Bemidji, Minnesota, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And we are not all like Fargo, but some of us are.
So
Sounds a bit like that.
probably, yeah. I'll probably have her look at the stuff on Bemidji and ask her to look through it as a Minnesotan to make sure I haven't usurped her culture in any bad way.
Don't worry, no lawsuits pending.
Thank you, dear. So Bemidji is important, and in New York City, those two places are important. And in the woman puzzle, it's important when she is in New Jersey, where I grew up, and then, ends up in Cleveland when she gets married, and then goes to the West Coast. The thing is, I only lived on the West Coast in Washington State for 2 years. So I have a friend whose daughter lives in Seattle. And she's a great editor and researcher. So I would write to Leanne and say, I need a beach nearby Seattle where she could get there. Would she drive? Would she take, I really had to use my friend. Of course, when the book is published, she will, well, it is published and I didn't put her in it. Okay, sorry, Leanne. Yeah, but anyway, she was really helpful.
Yeah.
I wasn't getting it quite right.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to leave this Zoom. I have really appreciated reconnecting.
Oh, Julie, we'll have to connect outside of Zoom.
Yeah. I just have to go.
That's okay, but thank you for delivering the news.
You're welcome.
And say hi to your family.
Yes, I will.
From both of us, yeah.
I'll be in touch soon.
Okay, thank you, Julie. Thanks for coming.
Wonderful.
Yeah,
An eye-opener to me, too, because I'm not a writer. I suspect all or most of you are, so it's very...
She lives in the world of visuals.
Okay, bye, everyone. Thanks.
Bye, Julie. Thanks for the good news.
You're welcome.
Say goodbye too. I have a dance class, but thank you.
A dance class. I'm impressed. Thank you for coming.
It was a lot of fun. Thanks so much, Judith. It was wonderful. And I'm really not only looking forward to reading your book because I haven't read it yet, but I also am looking forward to the Time Traveler book too.
Thank you. Nancy, are you from around here or somewhere else?
I know you through Writers Chat, Rehoboth Writers Guild Writers Chat.
Oh, okay.
I've been on a couple times. But yes, I'm from here. I'm from
Okay.
Rehoboth.
Thank you for coming, Nancy.
It was great. I learned a lot from you. Thank you.
You're welcome. So
I have actually one more question for you
okay.
before we finish, which is I was wondering what you read, how your reading habits have formed your writing, if at all. Have your reading habits changed? That what your influences are, or if your reading does not influence your writing.
I'll read almost anything. I tend to prefer fiction. I'm in 2 book groups, so I'm reading books I might not have read. But you know, I'm someone's daughter-in-law who got a good review on the New York Times. Wrote a book of Sisters, Sisters in Hate, I think it's called. And that was an amazing book, but it took me a long time to get through it. And it's about the women in the right movement, I would call them fascists and, you know, white supremacist movement. And she interviewed 3 of them. And that book, you know, it took me a long time to read, and it affected me because we think of it as a man's movement, but the women are just as important and in some cases more important. And it's good to understand that. I like to go back to some of the books that I like the Virginia Woolf books and, you know, Carson McCullers and Faulkner. Fitzgerald, I think The Great Gatsby is probably one of the most perfect, really short, like 134 pages in terms of the story and the beauty. I'll never forget the wedding cake ceiling. That's one of my favorite things. And, you know, the rich aren't like us kind of thing. And I did my master's thesis on Tender as the Night, so by Fitzgerald. So I'm a Fitzgerald fan person. But there is
Ray Bradbury or
no, you know, I don't time travel. I haven't read a lot of time travel because of Bill for just pure. I don't want to think a lot, but I want something fun. I read murder mysteries. I read the Gamache series. I'm trying to think of her name, Canadian writer. And I like Margaret Atwood a lot. And Surfacing was like my all-time favorite in college. So I'm a Margaret Atwood person. I just love to read. I remember years ago, if there was a cereal box on the table, I would read it, you know, because I feel like I always need to read. So I have, I'm behind on my reading always. I try to read one thing at a time, but I'm not. I'm reading, not Kurt Vonnegut. I don't read Stephen King. I'm not a horror person, but I'm reading his book on writing that was suggested. And it's also about him. And so I'm reading that right now. I love Kurt Vonnegut. I'm sorry he's gone because I want more. And I'm trying to just think who else at this point. But the one about the circus, and she has a new book out, Night Circus.
Night Circus, yeah.
I adored. That might be my all-time favorite. And she has a new book, and I'm sorry I don't remember her name. She's a young writer. And Night Circus, if anyone wants an exquisite book, I suggest Night Circus. I just found it exquisite on every level. It's an amazing book. And that has what I would consider definitely magic realism in it. And, you know, I love Life in the Time of Cholera. I like the books by Marquez, and I like the book by, I'm also a reader, and I actually saw her in person. Who's the woman I've been quoting? Is she Brazilian? Allende.
Allende, yeah.
I got to see her at the National Cathedral, and she's such a small woman that they had to give her a riser to stand on when she was at the National Cathedral. And Toni Morrison, I just, a real eclectic taste in book. Just let it be good. And if something gets an award or I want it to be good. I want to read it and say, oh my God, this so deserved this. And when I read a book I'm not into, I still try to read to the end because I want to learn. Because as I used to tell my students when I was actively teaching, don't just tell me you didn't like it. Tell me why you didn't like it. You can learn even from a book you don't like. What would you have done differently? What is the problem with it for you? And I just think that's a really good exercise. So I don't know. Night Circus I would put at the top of the list if you're looking for an exquisite book. And I'm sorry I don't remember her name, but I'm going to look
And
it
it's
up
me too.
afterwards.
I read it a couple years ago, I think.
You remember her name? And she has a new book out, and I have to get it.
Remember.
Yeah. And I don't know if anyone else has a book they want to recommend. I'm always looking for recommendations. Cool. And Jordan, are you a writer?
I'm a student right now at Frostburg State. I'm studying English and Spanish. I'm not doing much creative writing, but it's interesting to hear you talk about magical realism because for my Spanish classes, I've been reading some, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, those kinds of short stories and things like that. So it's something I'm a little bit familiar with. So it's it's interesting to hear you talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I'm the AmeriCorps volunteer at the Center for Literary Arts, so I help to coordinate and to publicize the different events. So that's the connection I have here.
Great. Well, I'm glad that you came. I'm glad we had a student representing the students, and hopefully you'll get more of them.
Yeah.
Morgan, did you be waving?
No, that was just, I'm glad it's not just us codgers that are here. Jennifer's excluded. She doesn't quite, she doesn't rate as a codger yet.
Who, me?
I'm Judith.
Jen's
I've
not
been
a
a codger
codger.
since I was 10, I think.
Yeah.
Judith,
Yes.
you were looking for Erin Morgenstern.
That's
Erin Morgenstern. Thank you, dear.
Yeah.
That is who wrote Night Circus, Erin Morgenstern, and she has a new book out, and I have to get it. I think I'll just buy it, so I have a copy of it rather than go to the library, because our library has been really good about supplying books here in Milton. You just call them and they order it, and you go pick it up in a very sanitary way. Which is a shame, but then you get to really read it, and then they take 3 days to sanitize the book you read. So,
yeah.
but Erin Morgenstern, this young lady, I hope I love her second book as much. Her first book was brilliant. I mean, just loved it. So I would recommend Night Circus.
There's a to recommend a book to you. It's called Sparrow. It is about space travel, but it is, she's an anthropologist by training, and it's like a first contact book, and it's about it's character driven. It's Mary Doria Russell.
Mary, and could you spell the name of the book?
It's just Sparrow, like the bird.
Oh, okay, Sparrow. Okay, all right. And then I've got my Erin Morgenstern for Night Circus, and then her next book. She has a new one out. Anyone else?
Oh, so many.
I know.
I really like Indian writers and some Middle Eastern writers. I'm trying to remember their names, though. I'm not really good with names. Oh, this one, Mohsin Hamid, Mohsin Hamid. He has these kind of there are these kind of, they seem like really flip titles, and they're written even kind of flippantly, but they're really serious. Like one of them is How to Get Filthy Rich in Rising Asia. And another one is The Reluctant Fundamentalist. I found them to be very revealing kinds of books. I learned a lot from them in a way that you don't learn from like a poli-sci book or, sociology book.
Great.
And there's some really good Asian writers, but you probably know a lot of them.
So I don't even know what time it is, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, I think it's about time.
Yeah. Need to feel to go out there and yell and,
yes,
decorate my Biden-Harris signs and, take out the champagne again. This is very good news for the country.
Yeah, I think so.
So I'm glad it happened during my coffee.
You were clearly our good luck, Judith.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you everyone for listening and for participating. I really appreciate it. This was a good thing to do. And thank you, Diane, for connecting me to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Diane,
so much.
absolutely. Thank you for your help too. And Judith, I'll get this recording to you in one form or another as soon as I can.
Okay, and for people who know him, Bill's going to be doing one of these in, I don't know when.
December, right?
December?
I have to look back through email.
Okay.
Yeah, please.
Someone remind him.
I haven't found it in my schedule book, which is
Bill has a 4-series hard-boiled detective series, I guess, that we are beginning to publish next year. So it's great if you like hard-boiled detective.
Yeah, it takes place in the 40s, a lot in DC with a World War II vet. So.
And I think what makes my veteran private eye interesting to me is he's a veteran with PTSD, but nobody knows what that is. So as far as he's concerned, he has nightmares, and the thing is kind of awkward.
And it's a crime that they haven't been published before now. They're excellent.
Yeah, yeah. He had an agent who let him down years ago. So anyway, so that's something to look forward to. I'm sorry I didn't bring it up when everyone was here, but we'll let them know.
We'll spread the word.
Thank you. And thanks for doing this. And go Joe, go Kamala. So I didn't wear my button. I always do, but I didn't want to make this political, you know. But too bad. Too bad. You know, our lives are really at stake here. So, you know, and art and everything is at stake, and our health.
Stability.
Yeah, everything. So on that note, thank you. The real world intersects with art.
Yes.